We've been accusing the Trump regime of fascism for months and months.
And months and months and months. But I mean it, and I can reference stuff. I'm not just saying it flippantly. I can point to their actions and point to how I think it fits that definition.
So we're going to define fascism.
And then we're going to see if the Trump administration or Trump himself
qualify.
Because there's been a lot of talk that fascism has been watered down. It means nothing. People have been saying it too much. And to that, I would say people are saying it a lot because it's what's happening.
Sounds exciting. Are we fascist? Yes or no? Umberto Eco is about to tell us.
Yes. Welcome back to the United Front Show.
I am Dr. David Benjamin.
And I am just Max. And this week, there's been plenty of news, but just kind of more of the things suck and they just get worse.
Yes.
Things that, there's a headline and we would react to, go, wow, that's pretty terrible.
Yep.
And then we would move on.
Yeah.
We do want to talk about specifically the war that is brewing between Iran and Israel.
Yeah.
And for example, we apparently, maybe early hours this morning, or maybe late last night, a few B-2 bombers, the stealth bombers, and the refueling planes left, I think, Missouri, and are flying to the Indian Ocean, to one of our bases.
Wow. That's almost maybe en route right now, or maybe they've just arrived.
They'd be in the sky right now, or they'd be getting there. So that happened kind of separate. There have been Reaper drones, which is the drone everybody knows about, was flying over LA yesterday.
Well, that's interesting.
Last night, or maybe the night before.
Why?
And it was like aviation enthusiasts caught it on accident.
Really?
Yeah, you probably could find it on Reddit. They got a picture of it, and then they brightened it, blew it, and you can see the Reaper drone flying over LA. Someone made a good point. And if you think this is the first time they've flown a Reaper drone over the US, you're kidding yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
It's been caught. It's pretty hard to catch those things.
I wonder why they would be flying Reaper drones over LA. I mean, I could get it if it was near, I don't know, maybe there is a military base that's right there, and it's
I'm sure there's bases that we don't even
moving
know
a Reaper drone from one base to
there
another
could be a
base.
military base in this building, for all we know.
There could be a Reaper drone flying right over us right now.
Right now, and we wouldn't even know. So, but more specifically, I want to spend a lot of time on fascism, because everybody's been throwing that word around a lot. There have been a lot of claims
Including us.
Including us. We've been saying it a lot, but
We've been accusing the Trump regime of fascism for months and months.
And months and months and months. But I mean it, and I can reference stuff. I'm not just saying it flippantly. I can point to their actions and point to how I think it fits that definition.
So we're going to define fascism.
And then we're going to see if the Trump administration or Trump himself
qualify.
Because there's been a lot of talk that fascism has been watered down. It means nothing. People have been saying it too much. And to that, I would say people are saying it a lot because it's what's happening.
Okay.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair thing to say. So we're going to just jump right into it. No fancy business. So
yeah, we're going to get straight into it.
We're going to be referencing Umberto Eco, who is a Italian philosopher he was born in 1932.
An Italian philosopher from 1932 named
Umberto Eco.
Umberto Eco.
Umberto space ECO.
ECO. Okay. That sounds right. Umberto Eco.
Umberto Eco.
So what makes this guy an expert on fascism?
As a young boy, he lived in, I believe, I don't know where in Italy, but in Italy during Mussolini.
Okay.
So he experienced it firsthand, and he would have been almost, the war ended in 45 or 44 for him, Italy. So he would have been, 12?
Yeah.
So old enough to be aware of what's happening
during those teen years when you're really
he
becoming who you are.
He wasn't 3. He was old enough to be
aware of World War II.
I know what's happening. There's a war happening. And then he lived in Italy, and he spent a lot of his life, he lived his whole life in Italy. He got a bunch of degrees in cultural and philosophy related things. And through a lot of his studies, he wrote the book in 1995.
He wrote a book
In 1995 called Fascism, or Eternal Fascism, 14 Ways of Looking at a Black Shirt.
Eternal Fascism.
14 Ways of Looking at a Black Shirt.
Looking at a black shirt.
Which was, I believe, the Italian... So everyone's heard of the brown shirts, which were the Hitler's like personal little militia that turned into the SS. So when you look back, they're all wearing brown shirts. Mussolini had the black shirts.
Okay.
So they all wore black.
Got it.
So he writes a book in 1995, so a lot later in his life. It's collected a lot of information. It's, from my understanding, it's one of the more comprehensive lists you can reference.
Would we say this is one of the definitive texts that describes the definition of fascism?
I would use it as
fascism.
one of the more definitive texts, yes. If you're going to look at it as more than a Merriam-Webster definition, I would say.
Something a little deeper. So
a little more deeper, and in the book specifically, he says that this isn't you have to meet 8 of these 14 to be considered fascist. He defines it more of fascism is an ideology that's impossible to coherently lock yourself into or define because of the nature of it. But if you have one of these, it can allow for fascism to congeal around it.
Okay, interesting.
So if you're doing 1 or 2 of these things, it opens the door.
It could be the seed for
it becoming fascism.
Something full blown, but
exactly.
But you couldn't necessarily call it fascism at that point, or
you could not
call it the beginning of fascism. At that point?
You could call the seed. I like seeds is kind of how he uses it.
All right.
So we'll jump straight into the 14 points.
14 points, the definition of fascism, and are we going to go point by point on whether or not we qualify today as fascism, or how are we going to do this?
Yeah, so we're going to go point by point.
Okay.
I'm going to read it. They're very short. They're a sentence or 2.
Got
so
it.
It's what it is and then a sentence defining it.
Okay.
And then we're going to spend a minute or 2 of being like, well, does the second term of Trump fit it?
Okay.
And we're going to just go one by one, okay?
Sounds exciting. Are we fascist? Yes or no? Umberto Eco is about to tell us.
Yes.
Who really defines
who
what fascism
I think is a good definition. Yeah. So
okay, let's find out.
Point
Number one.
The cult of tradition, characterized by cultural syncretism, even at the risk of internal contradiction. When all truth has already been revealed by tradition, no new learning can occur, only further interpretation and refinement. So the cult of tradition, meaning we have already figured out everything for society via tradition. And if we simply return to tradition and just mash all of these traditions together, which is the cultural point that he points, it's like not one tradition, it's you just mash it all into a big ball.
Yeah.
And that's the cult of tradition.
And I think republicanism almost
Does
by
that
definition.
Yeah. At least modern American conservatism, for sure.
For sure. A return to traditional American values.
100%. They're always talking about, we got to return to the 50s.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Man goes to work, the wife stays home as a trad wife, a traditional wife. I mean, there's a reason that's an expression.
Yep.
And you can raise a family on one income.
And it's a mashing of all of these different cultural, signifiers and stuff. So I feel like you just point out, even the regular conservatives do that. MAGA definitely does, I feel like.
Certainly.
I feel pretty comfortable saying that.
Okay, so cult of tradition.
I'll give it, what we'll do, we'll go point, half point, or no point.
All right.
So half point if they kind of vaguely.
For sure.
I feel comfortable giving that a full point.
Okay.
Or do you agree?
Yeah, I think.
We have to reach consensus.
I can't disagree with the idea that some attempt to try to return to some concept of what is traditional in America is certainly a part of the ideology of republicanism or the ideology of conservatism. As opposed to progressivism, which would be progress, which would be by definition a change towards something else. To conserve, or conservatism would be to conserve the ways.
Yeah,
which
conservatism, as it sits right now in this country, if you're a conservative, you almost immediately are a Republican.
Yeah.
But those aren't
not
necessarily the same thing.
All right, but still, we're going to give that a full point for the current.
For cult of tradition.
1 point.
Okay, point number 2.
Yes, ready.
The rejection of modernism.
Okay.
Which views the rationalistic development of Western culture since the Enlightenment as a descent into depravity. Eco distinguishes this from the rejection of superficial technological advancement, as many fascist regimes cite their industrial potency as proof of the vitality of their system. In the book, he separates industrial achievement is not modernity. Modernity is progress, is cultural advancement, many things that we champion today. Accepting cultural, feminism, LGBTQ communities, like that has come accepted versus like the advancement of factory technology is not the same.
Okay. So I think if we're talking about it particularly in a cultural standpoint or a cultural context, the rolling back of LGBTQ
They certainly are doing it.
Yeah. I would say that there's a rejection of
modern cultural values.
Yeah. I think they call it woke.
Actually, I think you're 100% right. Okay. Descent into depravity, I think, is the key here. That they see it as
a descent into depravity.
This is gross. This is not. It's man and woman. What are you doing?
So a rejection of woke would be the modern interpretation of that, possibly?
Yep, because they've defined modernism as woke.
Let's call that 1 point.
That's 1 point. Okay. Easy, no debate.
All right, let's move on to the third point.
Okay, point 3, the cult of action for action's sake. That dictates that action is a value in itself and should be taken without intellectual reflection. This, says Eco, is connected with anti-intellectualism and irrationalism and often manifests in attacks on modern culture and science. So, I mean, is there really any debate here?
Yeah. Obviously. I mean, even
the guy in charge of medicine of this country doesn't believe in vaccines. Trump, the entire COVID response, let's just blanket, is an example.
Anti-science.
Anti-environmentalism. College is a scam.
Colleges is a...
Is a scam, is a huge thing that they say. And they want people to, fight back. And we're not going to let them take the Democrats take it from us or go show them who you are. But it's never like what are we doing for why or what's happening? It's just go scream and cuss.
Cult of action for action's sake.
Yeah. That the value of an action is in the process of an action, not what you're trying to achieve.
Just the fact that you're taking action towards anything is
the means something. Is the only thing that matters. The ends mean nothing.
So would you say that a deluge of executive orders as an attempt just to take action to say that I'm doing something, I'm taking action.
I think that's a great action for action's sake. I think the incitement of a riot and a potential coup in the last election.
J6.
Storming the Capitol. They didn't know what they were doing. He said, go fight back.
Just do something.
In the speech, he's like, don't let them take this country from you.
1 point.
1 point. Good.
All right. So they're 3 for 3 right now. The current administration meets criteria.
This is not looking good for them.
All right. 4th point.
Point 4. Disagreement is treason. Fascism devalues intellectual discourse and critical reasoning as barriers to action, as well as out of fear that such analysis will expose the contradictions embodied in the syncretic faith.
So what was that one called again?
Disagreement is treason.
Disagreement. Ask anybody if it's okay to disagree with Donald J.
Rhinos, Republicans who aren't totally in lockstep, you don't get elected.
The press.
They'll primary you. Fox News will ridicule you. I think it's pretty safe to say. Not even much to talk about on that one. That one's just...
If you write something bad about Trump, he will go after you directly if you try...
Fox News did one not super positive thing, and he's blasting them on Truth Social.
Clearly 1 point for...
I wish I could give it 2.
Disagreement is treason.
I wish I could give it 2.
Clearly.
Yeah. Point 5, fear of difference. So, fear of difference, which fascism seeks to exploit and exacerbate, often in the form of racism or an appeal against foreigners and immigrants.
Oh, the fear of difference.
You're not an American if you're not white, if you're not straight, if you're not a Republican.
Well, clearly there's a fear of difference, and they foment
foreigners and immigrants,
that fear of difference,
which is often linked to racism.
Yeah. If you could give anything more than 1 point, that
actually, so far, if I could give 2.
Yeah, this would be the one. But okay, so there's another point. So 5 for 5?
5 for 5? This is not looking good, folks.
Okay.
This is more than 33%.
Umberto, how prophetic of you.
Point 6. Appeal to a frustrated middle class.
Yes.
Fearing economic pressure from the demands and aspirations of lower social groups. So the distinction here is everybody appeals to a frustrated middle class. But the distinction is Bernie Sanders appeals to a frustrated middle class by saying billionaires are hoarding wealth, taking all the capital and pushing it up. Fascism says you're scared of the middle class, the poor immigrant will take your job.
I see.
The poor people are going to vote in the Democrats, and they're going to, siphon off the system. Welfare queen. So that's the distinction is they appeal to the middle class via the people below you want to take what little you have versus billionaires are taking everything.
Right.
I think that's the distinction.
Well, there is a distinction, although they're both attempting to appeal to a frustrated middle class.
It's not the appealing in and of itself that is the point here. It's in the manner of the appeal.
It's what they're blaming for the frustration of the middle class.
Whereas a progressive would blame the elite.
I'll go a half a point on this one because I feel like both sides could be considered guilty of
That's fair.
Something to that effect.
It's not unanimous at the moment to conservatives or Republicans, but they do it. So I'm okay with half.
Certainly.
I could hear an argument for a full point very easily. You know what? We'll be generous. So of 6 points, 5.5. Okay. Point 7.
Yeah.
Obsession with the plot.
Obsession with the plot.
The hyping up of an enemy threat. This often combines an appeal to xenophobia with a fear of disloyalty and sabotage from marginalized groups living within society.
I mean, I feel like I've seen that on several bumper stickers.
Yeah, actually, I feel like...
with rainbow flags on them.
Yeah, an obsession with the plot. So the emphasis of hyping up an enemy, using xenophobia to hype up that enemy.
They're eating the dogs and cats.
They're not Americans, they're immigrants. They're eating the dogs and cats. And they're going to destroy this country from the inside, and they're going to steal the votes or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point.
It's a witch hunt.
JD's lead up to the election, I think, beautifully embodies that set number 7.
Yeah, the idea of obsession with that part of the plot. 1 point. Seems like there's a lot of overlap with some of these ideas as well.
Some of these, there are a lot of overlapping, but they are distinct.
All right. Yeah, that's a point for that one.
Number 8. Fascist societies rhetorically cast their enemies as, quote, at the same time too strong and too weak.
Cast enemies as too strong
and too weak. On one hand, fascists play up the power of certain disfavored elites to encourage their followers a sense of grievance and humiliation. On the other hand, fascist leaders point to a decadence of those elites as proof of their ultimate feebleness in the face of overwhelming popular will. So Democrats are both equally destroying this country because they're weak and Biden was weak, and also Biden stole the election.
1 point.
1 point. Pretty simple. That's a big tell, in my opinion, a very big tell, is you can't cast your opponents as they're totally useless, they have no power, and they're going to destroy all of us.
Yeah.
What?
Yes, I feel like you've heard that line as well. I mean, even with what's going on now with Iran, and Iran is both weak and possibly a nuclear power.
They're going to have a nuclear bomb in a week, and they're going to blow the whole world up, and we're going to destroy their country in a week. Like, what?
Okay. Yeah, I feel like that's a point, to cast the enemy as both too strong and too weak.
Yes.
It's just mental gymnastics and twisting to confuse the populace.
Yep. Number 9.
Yep.
Pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. Because life is permanent warfare, there must always be an enemy to fight. So this principle leads to a fundamental contradiction within fascism, the incompatibility of ultimate triumph with perpetual war. So he references Hitler and Mussolini, like constantly seeking an enemy, but you can never achieve the peace in the society you claim, the superior society, if you're like, or ultimate triumph if you're at perpetual war.
So here's my interpretation of that for the Trump regime.
Okay, yeah.
In the modern age...
Yeah, it doesn't manifest as like guns and bullets are the same.
Right. In the modern age, I think it's less about guns and bullets and more about economic war. So
Cultural war, too.
Yeah, I mean, even just tariffs and this
Seeking out fights because
constant
life is
game.
war. And
the constant game of going after our enemies in an economic way.
our allies
Our allies in an economic way. I feel like...
It's finding a new enemy within the Republican Party to revitalize the base.
Yeah.
Oh, we hate Mitt Romney now, even though he ran for president
But
4 years before.
But he does identify pacifism specifically. And although Trump is not a pacifist, I don't think, I'm leaning towards no point on this one.
I'm leaning half.
Okay.
Because I agree that the rhetoric usually isn't so obvious. The action, I think, falls pretty in line. So it's a bit of a mixed signal.
Okay. Half a point.
I think if that's fair.
Okay.
I agree that they're not sitting here preaching
Yeah.
war,
Certainly not.
but they behave in such a manner
Yeah.
with the tariffs, with our allies, with China.
You could consider the support of Israel and what Israel is doing and the decisions that they're making
As perpetual war.
relating to war in the Middle East could be considered along this.
Yeah.
So, all right, half a point. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, because it's not the same militant like rhetoric used by former regimes.
Right. It's not like Bush.
Yeah, not even like Bush. Bush was even more. Yeah. So
Or like Warhawk.
even just previous Republicans. So I can. That's fair. That's definitely a fair point.
Yep.
Number 10, contempt for the weak, which is uncomfortably married to the chauvinistic popular elitism, in which every member of society is superior to outsiders by virtue of belonging to the in-group.
The ubiquitous understanding of the concept of calling half of America snowflakes.
Is instantly contempt for the weak.
I think it automatically qualifies
Any
as
governmental system that like helps anybody who's poor, they seek to destroy. But the big beautiful bill they're trying to cut Medicaid, Medicare only helps those who aren't rich. I feel like is a very clear point. I feel
contempt for the
comfortable.
weak.
Definitely.
Trump goes after that all
That's
the time.
his favorite thing in the world.
One solid point for the contempt for the weak argument.
Okay. Number 11.
Yes.
Everybody is educated to become a hero, which leads to the embrace of a cult of death. Eco observes, the ur-fascist hero is impatient to die. In his impatience, he more frequently sends other people to death. This is a tricky one. You got to pay attention a little for this one. I think J6 is the most obvious, bold, loud example of this.
Okay.
I think the Gretchen Whitmer plot to like kidnap her, I think is another example. They were definitely riled up by Trump. Right-wing terrorism in this country is by far the leading
Domestic terror problem. Yeah.
terror problem. Not even just in general.
In general,
yeah,
terror
not
problem.
even for it. Just anything that's happening here
All forms of terror problem.
that happened within this border
Yep.
is right-wing violence.
Okay.
Propped up by the narrative that Trump and his cohorts speak, but then the people under him who have permission to really ramp it up, right? Like a Charlie Kirk, who aren't in the admin, so can take what Trump says and say, see, look what they're doing.
I'll give it a half a point.
I think half a point.
I think it's the best I can do. I hear your argument. I feel like the implication of everybody's a hero is more aggressive than
it's not the main selling point of Trump. I agree. It happens and they do use it, but it's not the selling point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Half, I'm fine with half.
All right. Let's go to 12.
Machismo.
What's 12?
Machismo.
That's actually
Is the sense of being manly and self-reliant a contempt associated with a strong sense of masculine pride?
the number 12
Is machismo.
definition,
Which
point
sublimates
of
the
fascism.
difficult work of permanent war and heroism into the sexual sphere. Fascists thus hold both disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation for non-standard sexual habits, from chastity to homosexuality.
Okay.
So he uses the term machismo
it's very clear. I mean,
but it's the.
I mean, the manosphere.
I mean,
that he dominated in 2024.
Clear, it's a fucking point, right? But to help everyone else, it's Andrew Tate.
I was just going to say Andrew Tate.
It's Fresh and Fit, little less known to people who might watch, but Fresh and Fit is another red pill, any red pill space.
Yeah.
Manosphere.
Yeah.
All of them are like the spiritual embodiment of point 12.
Machismo.
Be a man, work out, don't cry.
Machismo is a hallmark of fascism. Solid point.
100% is.
It needs no argument or discussion.
I can't even. It's so obvious.
It's clearly a point.
So obvious.
Okay, fascinating. 13.
13. Selective populism.
Selective populism. Okay, what does he have to say about
this? The people, conceived monolithically, have a common will, distinct from and superior to the viewpoint of any individual. As no mass of people can ever be truly unanimous, the leader holds himself out as the interpreter of the popular will, though truly he alone dictates it. Fascists use this concept to delegitimize democratic institutions they accuse of no longer representing the voice of the people. I would say Trump seeking the unitary executive theory, where Congress doesn't represent the people's will and the Supreme Court doesn't, so Trump is going to do everything by himself. I think this one's a pretty good one, where he's like, he's MAGA, he represents MAGA. Everybody refers to Trump as their
Daddy Trump.
Like proudly, too, which is very weird. I think this one's a little more subtle if you're not paying attention, if you're not tapped in. But you got to think that they think that MAGA is the common will, and it is the correct and superior common will, even though you can ignore all the other polling and everything else that suggests
that's not the popular will.
Not the popular will. It doesn't matter.
Claiming the popular will.
And then they use the leader is the interpreter and the arbiter of the will of the people, MAGA. What they determine is the superior viewpoint.
That's a point.
And they use it to delegitimize democratic institutions. All the elections are stolen.
Yeah.
J6, again, I can reference J6 again.
Clearly a point.
Last point. Okay. I'm sad it's the end. I'm having a blast.
Well.
Newspeak. Fascism employs and promotes an impoverished vocabulary in order to limit critical reasoning. Woke, snowflake, libtard.
Just throw shade.
Trigger.
Vague insults.
Just buzzwords that really don't mean a whole lot. Not like a word that actually does mean something, like snowflake, woke, triggered, libtard, newspeak.
Newspeak?
The Orwellian word newspeak.
Newspeak.
Newspeak. Newspeak.
That's interesting.
So they employ and promote a vocabulary that doesn't allow for critical analysis or critical thinking.
Just woke is bad.
Woke is bad.
I don't know what it is.
Not an analysis of what any of it means. Woke is bad.
Woke is bad. You don't know what it is, but it's bad.
They can't even define woke. So I think that's a clear example of it. They do a ton of other ones, but that's the really popular one that everyone knows.
Yeah.
Because if you ask to define woke, they can't define it. We barely can. But it's the point of it is to not allow for analysis.
I mean, that's a point.
It's an easy point. How many points is that?
All right. So the final tally.
Final tally.
The final tally, 14 possible points. We awarded half points in some examples, so we ended up with 12 and a half points out of a possible 14 points to meet criteria for fascism. And it's our understanding that really only a few of these need to be present at most.
Umberto Eco claims that theoretically, any one of these fascism can congeal around any one. Theoretically.
Any one?
Not that it's necessary.
And we have 12 and a half? And this is not...
That's a good grade in school.
And this is not fascism?
By every grading rubric in the world, this is a passing grade. If I got 12 and a half out of 14 in a schoolwork, I'd be like, damn, I did good.
What do you have to say to those out there who claim that this talk of calling Trump a fascist is just nonsense and fear-mongering and he's doing what's right by the people and the country?
Tricky because a lot of these people will either not understand some of these points that it's happening or they like them. It's part of the cult. So it's tricky.
The cult is a problem here because
Something you might have previously disagreed with,
you'll become indoctrinated
and then support all 14.
and support everything that happens
Yes.
blindly.
Yep. I guess a really stupid and silly way to do this, but I've seen it work before, is what happens if the Democrats were doing all of this stuff? What if in 2028, Gavin Newsom's elected and Pete Buttigieg is his vice president, and they're doing the way Trump is acting now and the way he's doing things, it's flipped 180. So now Republicans are the bad guys. Now Democrats, the will of the people. They did everything the same. Would you be okay with that? And I say this, I get that this is a very simple and silly way to look at it, but I'm using it as somewhere to get through to people. If I was having a conversation, I would use something different. But a simple way to think is, are you be okay with that? And I would probably think almost every single Republican would say no.
Certainly.
And I would say, why?
Certainly.
What part of it do you not like? Are you happy for a Democrat to completely rule over you in a fascistic way? No.
Yeah.
So the issue, I would imagine, is that they're going to control you, not the policy.
To take away your
If you,
rights
if you
and freedoms.
think about it just a little bit, you'll notice it isn't necessarily the policy they're promoting, it's the fact that they're demanding it upon you, the control, the power. And when you realize that, you are the thing you hate. So either you get to fully embrace it, and so if a Democrat does it to you, you have to like it, or you don't support fascism and Trump. You can still be a conservative and believe in conservative values. That isn't fascism. Those are separate things.
So who are we appealing to here? Are we trying to
Well, mainly I'm seeking to educate.
educate?
I've even heard a lot of Democrats and liberals who have said we're using the term too much. And I say, I'm just using the only term that accurately describes what I'm seeing.
There you have it, folks. We have a
Oh, I'm going to ask you a question about this, actually.
Yep.
What would you say to a Republican who, or a conservative, whoever, who would say, well, let's pretend that they did the thing we just did, sat down, and they could find Democrats who could fit some of these. What would you say to that? If they can define it and they can point to evidence and they can say a Democrat got 8 out of 14,
yeah.
then what would you say to that?
I mean,
agree.
I would reject Gavin Newsom,
I agree.
even though he's on my team.
Yep.
I would reject Gavin
I
Newsom.
agree. I think that's what I would say. I would say, in the seek of the whataboutism, they say, well, this person feeds these points, and I would go, and I don't like them, and I don't support them. And so anybody who's watching and is on our side, more or less, if somebody comes to you and tries to refute, oh, well, this person does it too, the defense isn't, well, it's okay because they're on our team. That's what conservatives do. That's what the Republicans do. You got to be honest, because they don't know. I promise, if you you say, yeah, you're right, actually, Gavin Newsom is that problem too. Yeah, he's just as bad.
Yeah.
You will have immediately blown their mind and they don't know what to do. Nothing else is left to argue. Because like, yeah, I'm principled. I don't like people who are like this. And this is their system of running things, fascism.
I would say that people that have a liberal perspective on things do not become obsessed with the person or the leader,
It's far less of a cult of personality.
but rather what are the ideals that we stand behind,
Yeah.
and how do we lift everybody
Yes,
else
I agree.
up?
I think it's a human issue to get caught in a whataboutism and find yourself defending something that asked in a different context you might not. Kind of a human thing. You're like, oh, caught off guard. Oh, I mean, right? Remember to keep yourself principled. You don't like fascism? Great, you're a really smart person then. But that means if somebody who is a Democrat or claims to be a liberal does some of these points, you have to reject them as well.
And I would.
Even if they're your, like, if you sit here and I ask, who's your dream candidate for president? And it's whoever. But we sit here and do this process with them and they get 8 of the points, you have to reject them.
And I would.
Standing on principle, I think helps define us in this group away from the conservatives. And I think it's critical to have some principles. Helps navigating the world better. It helps people want to believe and support you if you're principled. If somebody who's always shifting, we make fun of Trump for shifting all the time. But if you're iron-willed, this is what I believe, Zoran Mamdani, He's pretty iron-willed.
Bernie.
Pretty iron-willed. I think if you're iron-willed in what you believe, it helps people want to see what you see and understand what you understand and maybe even believe what you believe.
Yes.
That's kind of my end little plea to those out there who aren't already themselves truly in a position to be iron-willed.
And I guess the plea is not with some deeply entrenched MAGA nut, but rather somebody who maybe is independent, or somebody who's in the middle, or somebody who maybe wants to vote Democrat, or maybe doesn't understand.
That's a good point. That's
the level.
That's true.
That we're at.
Yeah, I think not every Trump supporter is in the cult.
I agree.
I think that's a stretch to say.
100%.
I think a lot of it is.
I think it's a part of the Democratic problem.
I agree. It's a sense of people are
all the deplorables.
Yeah, that's a bad one.
You know what I mean?
Or people are uneducated, right? And they don't realize quite what this means or what that means or how bad this or that is.
Yeah.
And so I think when you can identify a person like that, being empathetic to their position of like, well, I'm not going to hate you because they're not educated on this.
Being empathetic to your opponent's position.
See it as an opportunity to, oh, you've not heard of this. Well, I didn't hear about it till a week ago.
Let's talk about it.
So seek it not as if they're in the cult, you're going to, I don't know how much you can do.
Can't.
You might be better off not wasting your time.
It is easier to fool a man than to convince him he has been fooled. Mark Twain.
Wise words. But if a person you can see is just in a position of not being educated, it is upon you, if not you, to educate them. If it's not your burden, then whose is it? If they're your friend and it's not your burden, whose is it? If you want a better world, it is your burden. It is all of our burdens.
Talk to your friends and family who might be on the edge.
Let
them know what's happening.
That's a wrap.
Man, we are fully in a fascist regime.
That was a good one. Yeah.
12 and a half out of 14.
How surprising was that to you? I knew it was going to be like wow, that's really actually pretty bad.
It's a high number.
Yeah.